Mhm.
And so what I think that I like about EMDR, at least my understanding of it, is that it understands that. It's like
Mhm.
it kind of sees that there is something that happened to you that's so salient, like it's such a shock that it's trying to swallow you into it. Like it's an event that's trying to swallow all of you into this event, your body, your memories, your emotions, and it's not completely willful. Like it's something that
No.
it's almost that's almost automatic.
Yes.
Um, but that there is also a way to reorient those memories, or good way of saying it is the way you said it. It feels further away. It's like to
Yes.
not to get rid of it, like not
Right.
to forget it, but to place it in its proper place in the hierarchy of who you are, like to
Mhm.
replace it and say, yes, this happened to me, yes, this has some importance, but it is not me.
Welcome to the Lion Counseling Podcast. I'm Mark Odland, licensed therapist, EMDR specialist, and founder of Lion Counseling, where we help men break free, heal deep, and become the lions they were born to be. Today, I'm honored to talk with Jonathan Pageau, a renowned liturgical artist, writer, and cultural commentator. Through his popular YouTube channel, The Symbolic World, Jonathan's become one of the leading voices in helping people to rediscover the symbolic patterns, the deep patterns and stories that shape our world, that shape our faith, that shape our lives. He's the author of the graphic novel God's Dog and the founder of the Symbolic World Press, a publishing company reclaiming the art of meaningful storytelling for a new generation. With nearly 250,000 subscribers and a global community of thinkers and artists, Jonathan's helping people recover beauty and hierarchy and spiritual vision in an age of confusion. In our conversation together, we'll explore topics around trauma, transformation, what it means to be a man in this modern world, and we'll hear a little bit about Jonathan's story, his journey, and talk about memory and how it shapes us, and how we as men might be able to walk through this beautiful but challenging life. Let's go.
Escape the cage now. Be the lion you was destined to be. Born ready for the war, now my effort is free. The level's been set, time to wrestle the beast. Testing my G, it's getting heavy indeed. The struggle I embrace now, never retreat. I see the test.
And my guest today is Jonathan Pageau. Jonathan, welcome to the Lion Counseling Podcast.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. It's truly an honor. I know being a patron in your symbolic world, we've had a chance to talk a little bit off the camera, and I was looking back at my notes, and we've talked about art, faith, EMDR therapy, graphic novels, dream interpretation, AI, and tattoos. And specifically how you'd probably never get a tattoo, even if it was in the oldest tattoo shop in the world in Jerusalem, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Probably
Yeah, yeah. Well, to start out, for those out there who maybe aren't familiar with your work, Jonathan, maybe you could share just a little bit about your background, your story, and um, no pressure, just covering your whole life up until now.
not.
But yeah, anything you'd share about your background would be great.
Sure. So I guess the first thing to say is that I'm mostly an artist. One of the things that I've done is created images for churches, created icon carvings, liturgical art for churches. But I guess the thing now that I do mostly is I discuss Christian symbolism. I discuss symbolism in general, and how the different patterns of meaning affect our lives and how we can recognize them,
Hmm.
and see them properly. And so I have a YouTube channel where I talk about that. I do conferences. I also write children's books. So I do a whole bunch of things that are kind of around the theme of image making and storytelling, trying to kind of help people reconnect with the deeper meanings that imbue our lives.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I know that you talk about a lot of deep things. This isn't shallow conversations that you're delving into, but apparently it's tapped into a kind of a huge, um, I don't know if void is the right word, or need, because it seems like it's attracted a lot of people who are interested in these things.
Yeah, I think that we're in some ways in a kind of crux. We're at a civilizational moment, I guess you could call it, where for the last 100 years, give or take, things have been kind of collapsing or fragmenting. It's been happening for more than that, but that has accelerated, maybe at least since World War II.
Yeah.
And so we kind of feel the fragmentation of our narrative, the fragmentation of our religious institutions, of our societies, basically of the social fabric. And that is coupled with a kind of, the popularization of a kind of reductionism where people struggle to see meaning aside from just a bunch of things bumping into each other. And that culminated in the new atheist movement, really, in the early 2000s, that kind of cemented this really reductionist way of thinking. And it's that type of thinking just infected all of the institutions and kind of trickled down into popular culture. And so because of that, people, basically are struggling to understand what is the meaning of the world and how everything fits together, why we should exist. But at the same time, there's also
Yeah.
now a counter movement that is happening in all different fields. In cog sci, we see it happening even in physics, in different fields. There, people are kind of understanding that there needs to be these patterns of perception and patterns of meaning, and that the world isn't arbitrary at all, and neither are human desires or human. It's not true that humans have a subjective overlay on top of a kind of objective world, but rather our very overlay is structured by the same natural forces that make the world exist, and therefore it's almost like a 360, right? Where in the very process of trying to reducing everything and making everything into these kind of physical forces, at some point it flips back and then kind of refills the world with meaning and patterns. And for sure, I think cog sci and even psychology has been a big part of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I was at the Dave Ramsey Entree Leadership Summit in Denver this last week. And it was really interesting because these themes of the breakdown of authority in the world, the anxiety that comes with it, and just this sense that people feel scattered, and that disconnect from meaning and purpose and understanding the world around them, understanding themselves. It does seem to be an interesting time that we live in. Interesting is the understatement, I guess, with all that's going on. It makes me curious, Jonathan, do you think that learning to recognize these patterns and see the world as it is, do you feel like the foundation of being able to think that way was something that was embedded in how you grew up, your childhood, or how you were educated, or your journey as an artist? Do you feel like that was kind of part of how God wired you, or do you feel like that was something that you
Yeah, it's hard to fully understand what it is that happened, because it's not just myself. It's really my brother and myself
That's right.
that
Yeah.
started, kind of understanding the world this way and kind of puzzling things back together in terms of helping not only to understand and to perceive these symbolic patterns, but also to be able to communicate that to others. Because a lot of people have intuitions about symbolic patterns, but when they try to explain it, it turns into gobbledygook woo, and
Uh,
or conspiracy theory stuff, and so it just kind of breaks down. Whereas we work very hard but the question of where does it come from, it's not that easy to understand why it
right.
is that we had this opportunity to have these perceptions, when we did, usually mostly in our 20s, like early 20s is when all of this kind of started coming together.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's it's hard to kind of go back in time and know exactly how it all converged and came together, but here you are. And
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, we come from this weird world where my father and my mother converted from Catholicism to Protestantism, and like a big wave. There's this,
ah,
Quebec, where I'm
okay.
from, the French Canadian world. It used to be the most Catholic place in the world until the
Mhm.
1960s, and then in the late 60s, early 70s, like what happened everywhere, there's kind of like a revolution happened here, and that led to a mass ex exit of the Catholic Church. And part of the people that exited the Catholic Church, many of them, not many of them, but a certain amount of them ended up becoming Protestant. and that was my family. And so in some ways it's hard to understand. Like it's this weird thing where everybody in your church is very, very anti-Catholic, like
Okay.
really radically anti-Catholic, because they all came, every one of them came out of Catholicism. Like every single person in your church is basically a convert from Catholicism. And so I think that might also have created a kind of excess in our upbringing, and in the place where we were, that ultimately made us in some ways start to question or to look back into tradition, you could say, and to try
Right.
to kind of understand it. And that's possibly part of it. It's like this weird schism that happened,
Hmm.
out in the generation of my parents, that we're trying to heal, but that brought us to understand things, try to understand them at the deepest level we could.
That's right. That's interesting. Almost, I would imagine, I mean, one of the critiques, right, of Protestantism would be kind of a breakdown of hierarchy and a loss of tradition in some ways, and then how does it not disintegrate into kind of a free for all or some kind of chaotic thing? And it's something I struggle with, right? My background is Lutheran. Was in the ministry for a while now more so through the counseling. But that continues to be a tension, right, between a certain understanding of Scripture and then at the same time this history, this tradition that we became a part of, that we came from in the first place, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's also, there's something also, how can I say this? Because there's a relationship between some aspect of Protestantism and secularism. It's not completely conjoined, but there's a relationship in the sense that there's a kind of suspicion of forms,
sure.
and in not in all Protestantism, but in certain, especially the ones that I grew up in, where in some ways all forms are considered superstitions, where like all these
Mm.
things, the architecture,
Right.
the ritual aspect of the religious ceremony, it's all considered superstition. Like in my church, we didn't even say the Our Father, because we're like, you shouldn't repeat the prayer, because that's like a superstitious thing. You should
Interesting.
always pray very spontaneously and improvisationally, as if authenticity was improvisation, as if authenticity was informality, right? Um, and
Yeah.
so there's this kind of, and so I think that it was also trying to kind of understand ritual and understand the reason for these patterns,
Interesting.
because the ritual appears in all the Old Testament, it appears, in the Revelation, it appears all through Scripture. And so, what is it like? What is it we're doing? Why
Right.
would we engage in these kind of rituals? And then ultimately realizing that in some ways our whole world is ritualized, like everything about, like all our behaviors are to some extent ritualized, whether it is a conversation or a handshake or brushing your teeth. There's an order of participation,
Interesting.
and so it's all of that. I think that's also part of it, where in some ways it was like trying to understand these things, and then ultimately trying to then reintegrate them, because seeing the world with symbolism isn't sufficient. It's a beginning, because in some ways it can help you see that, let's say, the things that you might have thought were silly maybe are not as silly. Maybe that they actually have a very deep underlying pattern in them. But then you also have to participate, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not just about a kind of mental game that we play.
Right. Right. It can't all be in the head. There has to be an experiential component, a living out, engaging in that. Thinking again about your story, Jonathan, just out of curiosity, did you have as a kid, did you have any thinking about fairy tales, which are something you're passionate about now, thinking about superheroes, fairy tales, heroes? As a kid, were there any particular ones that you gravitated toward or that you found compelling in some way? Um,
Yeah, I mean, I had many, I really obviously loved stories when I was younger. I liked fairy tales when I was a kid. I have very strong memories about certain fairy tales, Alice in Wonderland,
mhm.
Jack and the Beanstalk, all these stories from when I was young. And I also have memories quite young, not as a child per se, but let's say, in those tween years, being curious about the stories, being curious about, like, for example, Jack and the Beanstalk, wondering why that's a story in the first place.
Right.
Because I was already starting to be told that fairy tales are moral or morality tales, right? It's like that the reason for fairy tales is to teach someone
Hmm.
morals. And then I remember thinking when I was like 12 or 13, thinking, man, that Jack and the Beanstalk story, that's not a morality tale. Like what's the moral? Like go there and steal things from other people? Like there's no
Uh-huh.
moral. And I was thinking about like Puss in Boots and all these stories, and I'm like, these are not moral stories. Like when people tell you there's a moral, what's the moral of Puss in Boots? It's like lie and trick,
Right.
and do all these things in order to basically like make your put. Anyways, and so I remember even having those questions, and then it's older that I started to look into it more and realize that there's more going on, obviously, in these stories. But as an early teenager, it was also like I was just a child of my times. Like I became very much interested in Batman. Like I really loved Batman. And I was
Yep.
like 13 is when I think when I was 13 is when the Tim Burton movie came out. And then I like Frank Miller had put out his Dark Knight comic just a few years before, and so there's just a lot of buzz
Yeah.
about this trying to take these pop stories and then giving them a layer that would make them kind of more deeper, or trying to look into the mythological aspects or the more kind of almost even psychic aspects. I remember when Grant Morrison had written that Arkham Asylum comic, which was Batman in the Arkham Asylum, and then all his enemies are basically like aspects of his psyche and
Mhm.
psych obsessions. And so it's almost like he's dealing with his fragmented psyche as he's encountering these different bad guys in the asylum.
Mm.
And I remember I was like 14 when that came out, or 15, and being really impressed by it and thinking, wow, there's something you can do with stories that's very powerful. And then it's only later realizing that a lot of the stories that I'd taken for granted, for example, the Bible stories, actually were the deepest versions of that they actually had layers upon layers that these modern stories couldn't even touch.
Wow. Yeah, and you're doing that, you're actively pursuing that with Symbolic World Press right now, right? With your books.
Yeah, and so one of the things we're trying to do, because a lot of people complain about the state of culture, and I do, I complain about the state of culture.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but I think that at some point we also have to step in, and if we think that, for example, children books are becoming like ugly and propagandistic and are lacking the kind of celebration and beautiful elements that were in the old fairy tale books, and let's do it. Like, let's just do it. And so we're trying to retell the old fairy tales in a way that is beautiful, celebratory, insightful, and that also brings in even some insight for the grown-ups.
Mm.
And one of the things that the postmoderns did with fairy tales, which was pretty smart, is that, they made these fairy tale movies like Shrek, for example, where it's like a mishmash of fairy tales. So it's really kind of smart in that way, where they kind of mix the fairy tales together. And then there's like the kids reading where you watch and it's like there's joke, but then there's
Yep,
also like
yep.
adult reading. And the adult reading is just dirty jokes, basically. It's just basically cynicism, dirty jokes.
Uh,
And so I thought, like, can't we have an adult reading that's actually insightful, that is actually helping the parent realize why they're telling that story in the first place, or help the parent realize why, even as a child, they were fascinated by this story. And so that's what we tried to do. So the fairy tales can be read to children, just straight up fairy tale for kids. And they're beautifully illustrated, very attentive to the detail. And then at the same time, for those that have the eyes to see, there are
mm.
these hints about how these stories connect to ancient mythology and to other stories. So
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, there's so much power in the stories and in the symbols, um, and it makes me wonder too, Jonathan, like thinking about your own journey is, do you almost feel like seeing things symbolically is almost like at this point an operating system that's just part of who you are? Or do you feel like you have to be intentional to apply it? So like for example, there's a lot of suffering in this life, right? And when you think about going through something difficult in life or something challenging, is it something where that just kind of flows out of you as you cope with it, as you work through it, as you try to overcome difficult things, or is it something where you have to say, I need to apply this in some way?
yeah. Well, yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think that, for example, one of the insights that you get from understanding symbolic stories, even if it's you consider something as simple as the hero's journey, this kind of basic story
Hmm.
structure that Joseph Campbell tried to describe. One of the things you realize is that obstacles and difficulties, and suffering is always also an opportunity. um, because as the world that you're part of is kind of falling apart or is breaking down in different ways, it's not to belittle that, right? It's not to say, well, it's not a big deal, like it's just an opportunity. No, it is suffering and it is painful,
Yeah.
and there is room for weeping and gnashing of teeth. All that stuff is part of life, but then realizing that all suffering is an opportunity for change.
Yes.
um Even your own sins, like even when you sin, there's no celebrating sin, but every time you sin and you face the consequences of your sin, that is actually an opportunity to transform. And so I think that that's one thing that I try to always keep, is that when I go through obstacles or through difficult things, I always try to be as much in the position where, instead of simply suffering, although it's normal to suffer,
Yep.
I also have my eyes open for the changes that are possible in that transformation. Like when you realize, like, let's say a friendship ends, or a
Hmm.
you lose your job or whatever. All of these are tragic things, but all of a sudden the world becomes possibility again, and so it also can be an opportunity to kind of find that treasure in the dark place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in some Christian circles, it almost might feel cliche when people say, well, it's only in hindsight that you look back and see how God was at work. But I wonder if that still holds true in your experience. Is that limited in how people frame that? Or do you feel like an accurate
No,
depiction?
I think that that's definitely true, but I think that you can also, in those moments, you can find the best internal stance possible, like
Yeah.
the one that is the least destructive, and in some ways to kind of, one of the things you can also do uh in when things are breaking down and when difficult things are happening is to kind of stop, like to
Yeah.
stop acting, because sometimes we start flailing, and then we start
Mhm.
hitting in every direction, and we panic, and I mean, that happens to me still, obviously.
Sure.
But usually the best stance is, in some ways, to kind of be attentive, to just stop and be
Yeah.
attentive, because the in that kind of chaos, glimmers are always there. Uh, and it's easier, like, it's funny because it's easier to see it in other people. Obviously, it's harder to see it in yourself, but like, when you're with people that are often going through difficulties, sometimes you're like, you can kind of see, what brought them there, but you can also kind of see, what it is, or the best stance they could have
Yeah.
in that position, in order to find the best opportunity to move out of it. It's
Yep.
hard because when you tell people, obviously you just tell, they're like, it's annoying when someone says that. But what I'm saying is, when you notice it in others, maybe the best thing to do is to realize that that's also true for you. You just have to now, when it happens to you, try to pay attention in the same way you were able to pay attention to watching your friend kind of go through his divorce, and think like, okay, whatever, but maybe now it's too late. It's all happened now, like, it's all broken. So now let's see how we can put things back together in the best way possible, because there's no going back. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, that's an example, but like,
No,
there are all these
that's
things. Yeah.
that's powerful because and that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, in my line of work as a therapist, I see so often people have kind of a unhelpful way that they go to this place of extreme shame. It's not like a God-given guilt that's corrective, and you can be like, okay, this has got my attention. Now it can point me in a proper direction. And instead, it's almost like this place of wallowing, of turning inward.
Well, yeah.
And it just becomes so destructive because they aren't in a space to receive any kind of criticism. because that wound is so deep. I mean, of course, I'm conceptualizing it through that kind of therapy lens. Um, but to be able to that paradox, right? That
Yeah.
we're sinners and we're fallen and we are kind of in an active state of rebellion most of the time towards our Creator, and yet we're also created in His image, and we're so valuable. He went to the cross for us, and
Yeah, well, one of the things, Mark, is to understand that wallowing is pride. That's what wallowing is.
yeah,
It's
yep,
like when you wallow, when you self-deprecate and you wallow and you just kind of feel that like paralyzing shame. It's because you think you're more than you really are. It's because you think you should
mm,
be more than what you are, you know? And
interesting,
so true the true shame, like, or the true humility, is to think that no, you don't, it's not true. It's like, oh, I should have been better than that, like I'm better than that. It's like, no, you're not better than that.
right,
You're not.
right,
And
right,
so now get over it. Like, get over the fact you're not better than that, and now here's an opportunity for you to kind of to move in the right direction. And so I know it's a little rough. It's tough to say that, but I think that, because one of the things that when we feel sorry for ourselves, or when we feel this kind of wallowing, self-deprecating, self-accusing thing, there's a reason why the devil is called the accuser. There's a reason why Satan is called that, because there's an aspect of pride in that, like, how can I say this? In like this this acceptance of excessive guilt, excessive guilt in the sense that, yeah, you're guilty, but there's a sense in which we think that this guilt is so crushing because I think I'm better than that. There's a disjoint between what I think I am and what I've just done. No, it's like, no, you're exactly what you've just done, right? Like, let's now see that properly in the right way, and
yeah,
not just you, but everybody. Like, everybody is broken, everybody's beaten up, everybody sins. Like, your sins aren't special. This is what I tell, like, it's
yeah,
funny because I tell my daughter this. Like, she doesn't want to go to confession, to the
yeah,
priest, and she's like, it's shameful, it's humiliating. I'm like, your sins aren't special, dude. Like, your sins are not special. It's like, anyways, so that's what I mean. I think that there is, when you sin is actually always an opportunity. It's an opportunity to see yourself and to change.
mm,
Uh, it's better when you feel that, especially that first strike of guilt. Like, if you
right,
just feel it when you do something, when you lie, or when you I don't know, you insult, when you mock someone, or when you belittle someone, or whatever it is that you're doing
right,
that's bad. It's like, when that first strike, man, you just grab onto that, not like as a way to self-flagellate, but as like literally like a thing to make you float back up. Like, it's like, grab onto it, man, and just hold on, because that'll take you
yeah.
out of your, that if you can grab onto it properly, it'll take you out.
I love that. I had a picture of like holding on to a big balloon, and you're just like
Yeah, exactly.
floating on. And the other kind of image that came to mind a few minutes ago, Jonathan, we talk about flailing, kind of flailing around in our sins, not knowing that we're in that place. Back in college, my grandfather passed away, and a special guy in my life, and he, we were lucky because he had been in the midst of writing his autobiography, and it was unfinished, but it was still just this treasure trove of information about his life. And so I was able to kind of type it up and kind of get it into a form for the family. And one of the stories in there was he was a teenager living in a little town in Minnesota, and he was a lifeguard for the summer. And he talked about when people would drown, that's exactly what they would do. They would flail. And so one of the, mythological, I think it was real, but one of the stories was he had to swim out, and there was this big tough dude who was flailing as he was drowning, and my grandpa had to punch him. He had to kind of, I don't know if he knocked him out, but he had to kind of knock him out in a way so he could grab onto him and then rescue him and bring him back to shore.
Yeah.
And so that just kind of stuck with me as you were talking about that. How often are we in some way drowning or flailing, and we are either too panicky or too prideful or too whatever to see it for what it is. And I don't know if surrender is the right word, but to just, okay,
Hmm.
and then see it as an opportunity. So
Yeah, but at least stop. Like,
at least stop.
at least just stop. I mean,
Exactly.
there's an image in scripture that's beautiful, is the image of Jonah in the belly of the whale.
Yeah.
It says, because Jonah obviously rebelled against God, didn't do what God wanted, and because of that, he paid the price. He had to suffer death. He gets taken down into Sheol, into death. But then it says that he remembers God.
Mm.
Uh, and that's all. Like that's really it. It's
Just
like
remembering.
if you remember God, and you remember your position, that's why we say, Lord have mercy, like Kyrie eleison, which is this idea when we say Lord have mercy is to say that. It's like I remember God and I realize that it's like I just have to be in the right position. It's like mercy comes from
Yeah.
you down to me. I am not like in myself. I don't have everything I need to do what I'm going to do. It's like, um,
Yeah.
and so I think that's a good that's a good way to kind of still the panic and to still like the chaos.
I love that. I think this might kind of transition us into the next topic. But I think there's something so powerful about memory, like you're saying, remembering God, and it reminded me of a Good Friday sermon once I heard, and the pastor contrasted remembering versus dismembering.
Yeah.
Dismembering being like this disintegration of identity, of self, of life. And the thief on the cross, remember me, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom. There's something about remembering God and the idea that God could possibly remember us is such a comforting, powerful thing and a reason for hope. Yeah.
Yeah, and you see that you see that in scripture too, by the way, because in the story of Noah, in the story of Jonah, it's Jonah that remembers God. It said Jonah
Yeah.
remembered God, but in the story of Noah, it says God remembered Noah
Mm.
during the flood, like on the waters. It's like the world is God is when God remembers you, when you remember God, it's the possibility of a new beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, so this theme of memory uh kind of transitions us into, my work as an EMDR therapist. And I know you have some familiar, we've talked a little bit about that in a previous conversation, but coming into our conversation today, I wanted to throw out a little bit and just kind of see what you thought of it, just kind of what sparks you. Um, but the research kind of proven protocol for how we introduce a client to the traumatic memory that we're going to heal, to desensitize, and to open up the brain to adaptive healing information. The script is interesting because the first thing that we ask is what picture or image represents the worst part of it.
Hmm.
And then it goes on to what's the lie, the negative cognition, um, and what are the emotions and the body sensations that go with it. And we take baseline measurements to kind of measure how intense those things are. Um, but what I find interesting is that oftentimes one of the hallmarks of a traumatic memory that's actually healed is that the image or the symbol essentially has visually faded, or it feels further away, or it's actually been replaced by another image or metaphor that has almost taken its place. And what comes with it is oftentimes a deeper felt sense of the truth about themselves and the situation they went through, and a decrease in the anxiety that they're experiencing in real time, the way that their body is responding. And so I'd be curious about any thoughts that come to mind for you, as well as kind of this idea of how emotions or beliefs could almost be embedded in the symbols, in the images that we carry
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that the the best way to think about this is that there events that happen to us,
Mhm.
there are, how can I say this? Like, this is going to sound weird for people who hadn't thought about it this way,
Sure.
but it's like when an event happens to you, there are a lot of things happening simultaneously, right? And so, your pants are rubbing against your legs, like, your hair
Right.
is moving, and there are all these things going on. There's ambient sounds, there's all of this stuff that's going on, but there is something that's happening that is obviously more salient, and is
Right.
becoming the thing that you are focusing on, right? The thing that you're attending to. And that attention has to do with care. Like it has to do with what's
Mhm.
important to you, both positive and negative. Either way, it's like if you have a very positive memory, it's because there's something going on that connects to something that you care about, and
Okay.
that is what makes that moment heightened, right? And what makes it heightened. But it's also true, of course, in a negative way, right? That there are that there are things that happen to you that you care about because of self-preservation, because of all kinds of reasons that you that you have, and therefore that moment becomes extremely salient, and then becomes a major node, right? You could say in your story, right?
Sure.
So you can imagine that your life is a sequence of these important moments,
Yes.
and there are memories of them that are strung together by you, strung together in a kind of semi-coherent narrative of what who you are and what and your. But you always have to remember that there's all a bunch of other things going on that you don't necessarily string into that line of events, right? You're sleeping, you're doing homework, you're doing all these things, but those things you don't really remember that much because they don't have that like attention of care that
Right.
certain very heightened moments will have. Now, you can imagine that when something very traumatic happens to you, uh, there is this danger, of course, that because of how intense it is, it kind of it kind of climbs the hierarchy of who you are, right? It kind of becomes the central thing around which everything else starts to turn, and it starts to kind of gather all those other memories into it. It does all this. It's almost like this weird vacuum that kind of tries to swallow you up, right? Because of the intensity of what happened,
Yeah.
because you identified with so much, right? That that, like I said, that it becomes this vortex. And that is something that, I mean, obviously it's understandable that something like that happens.
Right.
It's not surprising.
Yeah.
But you can also understand that it's not necessary, right? It's not necessary that your identity is completely swallowed into one event, let's say, or a few
Right.
events that have had a massive effect on you. And that there is a possibility that the most important aspects of who you are maybe other things in that happened in your life, like your wedding, like your child being born, like all these
Right.
beautiful,
Right.
wonderful things that are part of your story.
Mhm.
And so what I think that I like about EMDR, at least my understanding of it, is that it understands that. It's like
Mhm.
it kind of sees that there is something that happened to you that's so salient, like it's such a shock that it's trying to swallow you into it. Like it's an event that's trying to swallow all of you into this event, your body, your memories, your emotions, and it's not completely willful. Like it's something that
No.
it's almost that's almost automatic.
Yes.
Um, but that there is also a way to reorient those memories, or good way of saying it is the way you said it. It feels further away. It's like to
Yes.
not to get rid of it, like not
Right.
to forget it, but to place it in its proper place in the hierarchy of who you are, like to
Mhm.
replace it and say, yes, this happened to me, yes, this has some importance, but it is not me, like it is not the
Right.
fullness of who I am. And like you said, trying to kind of disassociate, or to in some ways, how can I say this? Like actually deconstruct the memory. Like,
Yes.
you talked about dismembering, right? It's
Mhm.
like that is what you want to do to a traumatic memory. It's weird to think about it that way, but you're actually dismembering it. You're
Mhm.
actually saying you're breaking it down to its elements. You're removing. You're trying to separate the emotion from the memory. You're doing all these things because you're trying to make it less of a sacred thing, like a
Yes.
sacred center around which everything turns.
Wow.
Uh, and so I think it's a powerful, it's definitely a powerful tool. And it looks in some ways like uh, like there are several traditional practices that are related to that. Like for example, like the ritualization of ancient life, right? The idea of having initiation rituals, of
Yep.
having very like having marriage rituals, of having these moments high salience that
Yes.
are there to kind of capture you, and remember and tell you like this is who you are.
Yes.
You know, that person that took his first communion, you know, after confirmation or whatever, that's you, my friend. Like that's you. One of the things I think that in some ways what's happened in the modern world is because we like this worship of the informal, like I said, like this kind of dismissing of this of celebration, this dismissing of high moments, you know, this kind of reduction of everything to be everything being flat, is that's not true. That's actually a lie. And people that are in that world, I think, are more in danger of being captured by trauma
Mm.
because in some ways they don't have this hierarchy in which to embed themselves. They don't
Yes.
know how to know, not even just rationally, but just know what it is that they are, who they are, what they participate in, like what are they a part of. And so when something happens that's extremely salient and traumatic, it basically captures their entire being, and
Mm.
becomes almost impossible to get rid of, you know.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome, Jonathan. I'm gonna be excited to rewatch that because there's so much gold in what you just said. It's like, hey, I think I'm sure you're not very busy with your travels and your press and your podcast. I think you might become an EMDR therapist on
That's
the
right.
side, right? Uh, but I love where you're going with it because it's another way to think about in the EMDR session, we are dismembering the traumatic memory and we're opening up the mind spontaneously to connect to those salient, uh, beautiful experiences connected to meaning and identity. And that's if there is a limitation to EMDR, as powerful as it is that it's limited to what's already in the memory network of that person. And so if I have a client who has not had beautiful, powerful moments like
Mm,
that wedding, like that moment with their dad when they were 14, with the experience with God at church, their brain is just searching and searching and searching for something to grab onto
mm,
to say maybe this is true instead of this. And then there's that art of planting seeds and starting from the ground up in a way with that person because but when I get a client who's coming because they already want to integrate their faith, they already have some kind of background with some of these positive experiences alongside the trauma, it's so beautiful and exciting to see because their mind just it's connecting to these places and then they go back to the original memory and like you said they're like wow, like it's further away, right? It's further away. It's calm. It's fuzzy. And now I think about this instead. I think about when I got married. I think about,
mm.
a memory where their deep lie is I'm worthless, completely worthless, or bad or horrible. And now after EMDR, these other two or three memories of an experience in church, a loving grandmother who showed them that they were worth, so they were valuable, they were loved. Now that is taking up the space,
Yeah.
and it helps it. And it's not like I have to go through these three steps to remember that grandma loved me. Now it's like the nervous system takes it in, and they don't have to try so hard. It's almost like it's shifted the way that they're seeing things,
Yeah.
which is exciting and powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important. How can I say it's like it's important also because one of the things that you could say about this, like, you know, if you were to be cynical, is you could
Sure.
say, you know, it's like you're basically twisting the world, like, right? You're faking it, like you're kind of creating a fiction, you know, in
Right.
this person's life in order to replace something horrible that happened to them. You know, that could be the cynical take on this. But the truth is the very opposite, right? It's like you could say, you know, I mean, the simple example is like replace the memory in the hierarchy of what's salient to you. Like replace the memory of my loving grandmother. After replace the trauma with the memory of my loving grandmother, you would say, "Oh, you're just right. You're just fudging it. You're just trying to pretend." But the truth is that there's one of those memories that is life-giving, and there's one of those memories that is life-negating. Like there's
Mm.
one of those memories that if you make it the center of your being, it leads to all darkness. It leads to
Right.
death and desperation and and suicidality and all of these things. There's another version that leads to basically a spiral up, right? It's like a possibility to ingrain yourself in something, to imitate someone, to then reproduce that behavior, with the people around you. And that is true. Like it's true in the sense of, you know, life is not just facts. Like life
Right.
is orientations, and life is, it's the imitation of that which is good. And so, and the becoming good. And so I think that the it is objectively true
Yeah.
that the love that your grandmother had for you is more real than this trauma that you went through. Like it is objectively true because it is life affirming, and the other one is negate is a kind of negation of being.
Yes. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, I know we're getting close to wrapping up our time, Jonathan. One of the questions I like to ask our guests, and uh, of course, we could spend a whole podcast on this, but in a succinct way, a lot of the guys I work with are business owners, entrepreneurs, and they're pretty successful, but they're struggling to understand what does it mean to be a loving husband, a loving father, a successful businessman, and essentially what does it mean to be a man? And that is a complicated question with lots of cultural, shallow potential answers, right? But if there was a way to put into words from your perspective, what does it mean to be a man? I'd be curious what you'd say.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that there's a reason why in some ways men have this drive, in this kind of external drive, in to build things, to make things, to create, to master things. All of this is a very positive element of masculinity, and it's something that of course has been degraded in the past few decades. Like it's been mocked as just power, as just tyranny and something, but it isn't, right? It's actually, you could say, an element of how God created Adam, to be the
Mhm.
gardener, to kind of be the one who has dominion over creation. Now, can that go wrong? And the answer is yeah, of course it can go wrong. It goes
Yep.
wrong all the
Yep.
time.
Yep.
Uh, and the secret is really in the example that Christ gave us, is to kind of understand that the reason for a leader and the reason for mastery is offering. The reason why you would master anything, the reason why you would become the leader of anything, or that you would create everything, always in some ways has to ultimately be framed under the notion that it is an offering, that it's an offering to God, that it's an offering to others. Um, and so if we understand that, if we understand it deeply, then the balance, let's say, between, let's say, your career and your family won't be as difficult to manage, because you know you'll feel when you'd say your work and your family and your work life and your career and the things you're building are becoming an obsession in themselves, and you can usually sense that when you are in fact neglecting
Yep.
your family, because if it's an offering, then you're not supposed to sacrifice your children for
Right.
whatever it is you're building. That is not the case. Like that,
That's right.
that is a wrong way of understanding it. But rather, you should be making things in order to become, to serve your community, to serve your family, and ultimately to serve God. So I think that that's the way to understand it. It's that all of the things about masculinity, the kind of warrior aspect that we have, all of those are good, but they're only good if they're put in service of something, both that which is greater than you in the sense of giving to God, but also in service of those that are weaker, those that can use your strength, in order to make themselves better. So it's
Yeah.
like the image of the knight is a great example, like the true image of the knight who fights, but doesn't fight only for his honor, but fights for those that can't fight for themselves.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Well, I think you may have indirectly answered my last question, which is someday with when you are eternally with the Lord, you're not on this earth. How would you, Jonathan Pageau, like to be remembered? As fleeting as this world is, for at least the last next generation. We don't know
Yeah.
much about our great grandparents, right? But I would just be curious, what, if anything, how you'd respond to that.
I mean, I don't know. I don't think about that, but I would say if I have to think about it, I think that if in terms of let's say what I'm doing, obviously I hope that I'm remembered by my family and my friends for our relationship. But I'm hoping that, like, let's say in terms of the things that I'm doing professionally, like the work that I'm doing, that if I can be remembered as someone that helped a generation of young people to re-understand their faith, in a way that made sense in the modern world. Like, I think that the best aspect of what I'm doing is like it's not just me, but there's a whole bunch of people. We're kind of like there's like a wave of people that
Yeah.
are doing that, and yeah, if I can be remembered as someone who played a part in that, then that I'll be very grateful.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for you, Jonathan, and I really appreciate, I'm honored that you would take the time to do this today. And I've appreciated our other conversations and the your willingness to entertain my crazy rabbit holes that I go down, and and just appreciate as a fellow brother in Christ, getting to know you a little bit better. So. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and let us know, how can people find you if they're interested in your work or learning more. What's the best way?
Yeah, so people can go to the symbolicworld.com, and there you'll find everything like the YouTube channels, the books, the courses we give. Yeah, and that's the way to find me. Yeah, and thank you as well for this opportunity. It's weird because it's not something that I would talk about naturally, so it's kind of fun to talk about things that are a little bit outside of my usual wheelhouse, hopefully in a way that's coherent and makes sense. So I appreciate it as well. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, you're so welcome, Jonathan. Thank you, and thank you everyone for listening. And we'll talk to you later.